The men of the 6th Battalion 27th Artillery were now part of the Free World Forces, who would number over 224,000 by the end of 1965. The brave Cannon Kings arrived in Vietnam via the U.S. Navy ship Gordon at Vung Tau on November 2, 1965. After a trip of 33 days aboard ship, they were transported to shore and then marched to shore, where they were transported by truck to the Vung Tau Airport, where they boarded C-130s and were flown to Ben Hoa Air Force Base near Saigon. Here they deplaned and were then transported by truck to a staging area near Saigon University, where they set up camp. The equipment ship, the U.S. Navy ship Dick Lycus, arrived in Saigon Harbor 2 days later on November 4th. A detail was sent to the harbor to assist in the movement of the equipment to rejoin the men. The howitzers were unloaded by heavy crane onto barges in the Saigon River. These were then moved to a pier area near the famous Saigon floating restaurant. It was at this floating restaurant, the Mai Can Cafe, 4 months earlier on June 25, 1965, two sappers, members of the Viet Cong's 67th Commando Unit in Saigon, placed 2 bombs near the restaurant that killed 31 people and wounded 42. 13 were Americans and the others were Vietnamese.
During the rainy season in southern Vietnam, afternoon storms give way to breezy evenings that beckon people outdoors to enjoy a touch of cool in the thick tropical air. Friday, June 25, 1965, was one of those nights in Saigon. The riverfront across from Bac Dang Street and the Majestic Hotel, not far from the U.S. Embassy, was alive with parents chasing children, young lovers strolling by the water, street merchants selling food and drink, and customers arriving for dinner at the Mai Con Riverboat Restaurant. Mai Con was packed that night, and Saigon businessmen dined on fresh seafood and drank French wine alongside American GIs and their Vietnamese girlfriends. Seated at a table with friends, trying to talk above the din of conversation, laughter, and silverware on dishes, a diner would not have noticed a bomb that was set to go off at 8:15 p.m. After it exploded, stunned patrons who were able to stumble down the gangway to get off the ship would not have noticed a second bomb attached to a bicycle that was leaning against a cigarette stand on the riverbank near the end of the gangway. It exploded shortly after the first bomb. Of the nearly 50 people killed by the 2 blasts, more than half were Vietnamese, mostly women and children. The bombing was not random, it was part of a broader National Liberation Front strategy to destabilize the political situation in Saigon. The city was a war zone, and the urban war was not long before the Tet Offensive.
The restaurant was not seriously damaged and reopened 5 days later. It continued to serve Vietnamese, Chinese, and seafood dishes through the end of the war before it closed permanently. The terrorist escaped on a getaway motorcycle before the first bomb detonated. According to an article on the website HistoryNet, Radio Hanoi, a propaganda station broadcasting to American troops, described the raid as a new glorious exploit, dealing an appropriate blow to the U.S. aggressors. A radio propagandist also issued this ominous warning after the Mai Con attack: "You can get killed here. Get out while you're still alive and before it's too late." The APCs and other vehicles were similarly moved to the same location as the gun. These tracked vehicles then proceeded by convoy to the staging area along with the guns on November 6th. The battalion spent 16 days altogether in the staging area. While there, they processed vehicles, drew supplies, and made preparations for movement to tactical areas. The men also used the time to relax and unlimber from their long voyage. Living in pup tents did not provide the best accommodations to relax and unlimber, but the troops did the best they could.
While we were at the University of Saigon, everybody was so trigger happy and afraid they'd only issue us 3 bullets. So we had a full battalion and nobody had more than 3 bullets in the whole battalion. I don't know what would happen if the VC had attacked us or anything.
Alpha and service batteries were the first to assume their tactical positions, departing the staging area on November 10th. These 2 batteries jointly occupied an area east of Benoit, near the Widow's Village. Though this area was supposed to be a permanent location, it was not, for the battery's fires were found to disrupt the air traffic of the Benoit Air Force Base. Air traffic had to be stopped whenever the battery fired to the north.
On 26 February at Benoit, this howitzer of the 27th Artillery is standing by for action. A fire mission is received. The fire direction crew plots and checks the coordinates. The crew of the 8-inch howitzer repositions the weapon. The sighting is confirmed, the rounds loaded, and shortly thereafter, firing commences.
The 6th of the 27th Artillery became a composite battalion on November 15, 1965. On that day, 4 8-inch howitzers were transferred to the 2nd Battalion 32nd Artillery, with the 6th of the 27th receiving 4 175mm guns in return. The 13th howitzer, which the battalion had brought from Fort Bliss, Texas, as a float, was also transferred to the 32nd Artillery. This might be a good time to provide you with the capabilities of the 8-inch howitzer and the 175mm gun.
The self-propelled 175mm gun, M107, is impressive proof of the essential versatility of the carriage. which mounts it interchangeably with the 8-inch howitzer. Emplacement time for this formidable long-range gun is only 3 minutes. The shock of its firing is effectively harnessed and transmitted directly to the ground by the suspension lockout system and recoil spade. Separate loading ammunition is handled by the hydraulically operated combination loader and rammer. In one operation, the projectile weighing 147 pounds is picked up and positioned, inserted into the breech, and automatically rammed. The right and left limits of the hydraulically operated traverse, 533 mils, are the same as those for the 8-inch howitzer. A maximum elevation of 1,156 mils. The variable recoil and rate of fire are the same as the 8-inch howitzer. The maximum range of this core general support weapon is 32,800 meters. The self-propelled 8-inch howitzer M110 employs the same tube as the towed weapon. Range, rate of fire, traverse, and maximum elevation limits are the same as those of the towed 8-inch howitzer. However, traverse, elevation, and loading are accomplished on the self-propelled weapon with hydraulic power. The hydraulic power system greatly increases the speed with which the M110 can engage its target in its usual general support role. Hydraulic operation of the recoil spade and suspension lockout system, which stabilizes the weapon for firing, reduces its emplacement time to 2 minutes, greatly enhancing its mobility from one firing position to another. It carries 5 members of the 13-man crew, the rest traveling in a personnel carrier. Designed specifically for artillery purposes, this rugged, efficient carriage is capable of high speeds on average roads, but can also handle rough terrain, snow, and mud. Its cruising range is 375 miles. Air transportable, the self-propelled 8-inch howitzer is a division, corps, or army support weapon.
Bravo, Charlie, and headquarters batteries displaced their tactical positions near the town of Phuc Vinh on November 19th. The wheeled vehicles moved by armed convoy from the 1st Division staging area, while the tracked vehicles went by convoy to the Song Bay River crossing, where a 50-ton ferry provided by the 1st Division took them across the river. Tracked vehicles closed into Phuc Vinh on the 21st. All 3 batteries in Phuc Vinh at first occupied temporary positions near the airstrip As these areas were not defensible positions, within a week new areas were found. Headquarters Battery moved to an area between the district chief's compound and the Phuc Vinh School, while Bravo Battery occupied the old Headquarters Battery area. This move was accomplished in one day, with the battalion resuming its mission that afternoon.
We were assigned to the 1st Infantry Division. They further allocated us down to the 1st Brigade. The 1st Brigade was going to go into Phuc Vinh, which is about 35 miles north of Saigon. We convoyed up to Phuc Vinh and were the first American troops into Phuc Vinh. It was essentially an airstrip with a government building and a bunch of huts is basically what the town was.
Because of its isolation, supplies could be brought to Phuc Vinh only by armed convoys or airplane. The initial convoy, November 19th to the 22nd, 1965, brought organizational supplies, equipment, Class V, and enough other supplies to keep the battalion's Phuc Vinh elements supplied for 40 days. A second convoy, December 26th to 30th, 1965, brought in similar supplies for a 45-day interval. Batteries A and Service were located close to sources of supply, enabling them to resupply themselves almost at will. Ammunition was brought to the firing batteries in Phuc Vinh mainly by convoy, usually at the same time that other supplies were trucked to Phuc Vinh. Additional rounds were frequently flown in, especially when stockpiles ran low. Ammunition resupply was the responsibility of the Battalion Ammunition Section, which had 18 5-ton trucks for this purpose. The ammunition supply point was at Long Binh, approximately 21 kilometers from Service Battery. Operation of overloaded trucks on secondary roads caused damage to the frame, springs, and steering linkage. Ammunition trucks caused the most concern, overloaded a vehicle far before the volumetric capacity of its cargo area was reached. Mail for the troops was a priority. APO 96307 was assigned to the battalion prior to its departure from the United States. Due to the wide dispersion of the various battalion elements, the battalion mail clerk was stationed at Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base. He was thus able to pick up the mail directly from the base post office, one of the large central mail breakdown points. He then broke the mail down by batteries and placed the mail for Headquarters, Bravo, and Charlie batteries onto a mail helicopter. Service and Alpha batteries picked up their mail directly from the clerk at Tan Son Nhut. He monitored address changes to new arrivals, personnel who departed from the battalion, and those who transferred within the battalion. A sub-APO in Phuc Vinh distributed the mail to the battalion's elements there. Before you knew it, the men of the 6th to the 27th Artillery were faced with Christmas Day, far away from home. The presence of heavy artillery in the Phuc Vinh base camp made a direct attack on the camp by the enemy more difficult. VC operations within range of the big guns became risky endeavors for them. Harassment and interdiction fire kept him at considerable distances from the base camp. So the battalion was well established by the end of 1965. Its positions were well fortified, and it had adopted methods of operation that were well suited to the situation at hand. Moreover, in 2 months of operation, had made a large contribution to the war effort in the Phuc Vinh area. With the beginning of the Vietnam counteroffensive campaign in January 1966, the first effects of the American buildup began to be felt. Though it was slow and laborious process, the friendly forces did eventually succeed in wresting the initiative of battle from the enemy. Yet progress was difficult to chart due to the unusual nature of the war. American strategy in Vietnam was a complex blending of several different programs. One of these involved the creation and deployment of large, mobile ground forces. These were deployed in various tactical situations, aiming primarily at destroying the enemy's ability to fight. The emphasis was on mobility. Throughout the use of helicopters, ground forces could be airlifted rapidly into areas of VC dominance, often giving the Americans, it was thought, the advantage of a surprise in their attacks. When the tide of battle turned against the Americans, reinforcements were easily brought to the scene by the same means, many times altering the outcome of the battle. Use of helicopters also, by and large, freed ground forces from being tied down to their lines of supply. Artillery and other support elements could and often did accompany the infantrymen on these missions. This, of course, greatly increased the firepower and effectiveness of the aggregate force. The helicopter assault proved to be the most prevalent, most successful means of deployment in the Vietnam War. The size of these hell-born units was as a rule kept small, generally battalion size or smaller, for two primary reasons: to retain mobility and because the VC elements encountered by them generally were below division size themselves. It was a war of small engagements. Large-scale confrontations of entire armies never occurred at this stage in the conflict. Achievement of large tactical objectives was accomplished by well-organized, pre-planned combat operations. These were generally of battalion size or larger and were code-named. Ground forces were deployed by both air and ground means and usually stayed in the field for several days to several weeks. It was by these means primarily that the war was brought to the enemy. The battalion's first operation, called Jingle Bells, took place just before Christmas in 1965. It was followed by Lavender Hill, notable chiefly for the fact that the battalion's fires produced a large secondary explosion. The 6th Battalion 27th Artillery furnished fire support for a large number of these operations. On most occasions, the batteries did not have to leave their base camps to furnish this fire, due to the great range of the 175mm gun. It could reach targets in excess of 20 miles. Thus, the battalion's total number of tactical moves was low. The 8-inch platoon accompanied the infantry units to the field more readily than the 175mm platoons, particularly Alpha Battery. The 6th of the 27th Artillery was an 8-inch and 175mm battalion in Vietnam. Its prime role was to support the operations of infantry units. Hereinafter, we will not detail descriptions of each of these many operations. Rather, we will list each known operation that the 6th of the 27th participated in and its dates, but will describe more detail for major operations. One of the battalion's finest hours occurred during Operation Rolling Stone. This operation produced the first major contact between the VC and the 1st Brigade, 1st Infantry Division. 3 confirmed and possibly 5 battalions of VC had tried to overrun the field position of the 1st Brigade. The 6th Battalion 27th Field Artillery at Phuc Vinh was called upon to fire numerous counter-mortar plots located by the counter-mortar radar of the 1st Battalion 5th Artillery. These fires effectively silenced the enemy mortars. The battalion's guns also fired at numerous suspected VC troop locations and placed a ring of defensive fires around the 1st Brigade perimeter. The combination of all these fires contributed significantly towards the 1st Brigade's repulsing the enemy attack. A body count made the next morning disclosed that over 140 VC had been killed in the battle. Many of these casualties were attributed to artillery fire.
Near the border of Long Con and Phuoc Ton provinces, UH-1 helicopters slip into a landing zone with units of the 173rd Airborne Brigade to begin a search and destroy mission against the VC. It is 9 March, and Operation Silver City is now underway. This team gives first priority to inflating its pneumatic assault boat, which it will use for river crossings and recon. The boats are eased into the nearby stream as the troops prepare to move out. Both the Song Bay and the Song Dong Nai rivers flow through the area searched during the operation. The action is taking place in War Zone D, the Viet Cong jungle stronghold located some 50 kilometers northeast of Saigon. Operation Silver City also involved elements of the 1st Infantry Division and the Royal Australian Regiment, as well as troops of the 173rd. The 2-week Allied sweep through the area was planned to hunt and kill or capture the enemy in the notorious Zone D, which the Viet Cong had controlled with virtual impunity for years. At another LZ in the area, Chinook helicopters bring in more units of the 173rd. 1/4-ton trucks will provide essential transportation within and between forward command posts. Meanwhile, other Chinooks arrive at pre-selected positions with weapons and personnel of 105mm howitzer batteries. The howitzer crews lose no time in laying their weapons and preparing for fire missions in support of Operation Silver City. In addition to artillery support, numerous airstrikes and bombing runs were directed against the Zone D objective. In another part of the forest, elements of the 1st Infantry Division were filmed as they struggled against some of the natural hazards of jungle warfare. This M48 tank crew uses machetes and pioneer tools to clear a way through the thick vines and dense undergrowth that had ensnared their vehicle. The tank is cut free, and the column continues on its way. About 25 meters off the route of advance, this unit of the 1st Infantry Division came upon a bombed-out VC base camp, which, seemingly, had included a fixed steel kitchen or hospital. The camp appeared to have been abandoned several weeks earlier. A nearby bunker is investigated and found deserted. Personnel sift through a few scattered papers left behind and keep those that might be of value to intelligence units. The tanks and the advance guard reconnoiter the woods alongside the trail by fire before the column continues. During the day, this unit made a 5-kilometer sweep through the area without contacting the enemy. On the 2 following days, another unit of the 1st Infantry Division was filmed as it conducted a sweep covering some 8 kilometers through the same general area. The sweep began at the unit's base camp, some 14 kilometers southeast of Trois Vignes, and extended northeastward through the Song Bay River. Some of the troops fill their canteens at a small stream, and then they forge ahead through the jungle. Later on the march, the units emerge into an area that had been pounded by Allied bombs during Operation Silver City. A rest break is called while unit leaders assess the damage to the area and check the location on their map. Then, it is time to move out once more. Late on the second day of the march, a smoke grenade is used to guide in a helicopter for a medical evacuation. There has been no contact with the enemy during the strange patrol, but combat operations under these conditions take their toll in many ways, including heat exhaustion. Meanwhile, other members of the unit begin clearing resupply LZs as this small early phase of Operation Silver City comes to its frustrating close.
Operation Birmingham saw Battery A move to Tay Ninh Province to support the 1st Infantry Division's and the Arvind's 5th Division's search and destroy efforts in that area. The objective of the operation was to sweep War Zone C and engage the Viet Cong's 9th Division. The battery was attached to the 1st Division Artillery on 6 May 1966 and moved to Cu Chi that same day in preparation for the move further north. Battery A remained under the operational control of the 1st Infantry Division Artillery until the termination of Birmingham on 17 May 1966. Alpha Battery's effectiveness during this operation was hampered by the onset of the torrential rains of the monsoon season. At one point, the spade of an 8-inch howitzer was completely buried in mud due to the digging effect of a night particularly hard shooting.